So this question focuses on a company's cost of quality. Now we're going to quickly talk about the four different types of cost of quality, and then we're going to dive right into solving this problem, right? And this is great because not only are we going to understand the topic, but we're going to learn how to apply the topic, which is what you need to do for the CPA exam if you want to pass. So this is the visual that will help you remember the cost of quality types. So on the left side, we have prevention costs and appraisal costs. Now those are in green because they're considered costs of good quality, meaning if a company has a quality product, then you're going to incur these costs. Now on the right, we have in red internal failure costs and then external failure costs. And these can be categorized as costs of bad quality, meaning there's an issue with a company's product. Now we're going to incur some costs to remedy the situation. So let's quickly talk about each of the four. So for prevention costs, these are basically incurred to avoid quality problems. And some examples include planning, maintenance of equipment, training of your employees or suppliers, right? So prevention costs, those are always going to incur to basically prevent bad quality. The next bucket is appraisal costs, and these are incurred to measure and monitor activities related to quality. So some examples here would be inspection of equipment or materials, calibration of certain machines, and then periodic audits to make sure that everything's functioning as it should, right? So those are appraisal costs. Now for the failure costs, we have internal and external. So for internal failure costs, these are incurred to remedy defects discovered before the product or service is delivered to a customer, right? So a company produces a product, now they're doing some testing and they find out we can't sell this, there's an issue, right? So some examples of internal failure costs include rework, scrap, delays, right? Those are examples of internal failure costs. The last bucket is external failure costs, and honestly, these are probably the worst. Now, these are going to be incurred to remedy defects discovered by customers after they have purchased a product. So some examples include customer returns, warranty claims, right? You could have a low quality image to your brand or company now. It's really hard to quantify sometimes external failure costs because they can damage a brand way down the road and forever and ever, right? So those are the four different types of costs of quality. Now let's dive in and solve this problem. The question lists out a number of different expense types, and what we're going to do is map these to one of the four buckets. And then ultimately, the question is just asking us what is the total prevention cost for the company. Now, in general, I would say this sort of exercise is a bit subjective, but I will try to be as objective as possible when we go ahead and categorize each of these costs to one of the four buckets. So let's start with the first one, employee training costs of $20,000. Well, when we train our employees, we're helping prevent issues, right? Now they know what to look for and how to have a good product. So employee training costs are going to be prevention costs. So put that $20,000 under prevention costs. The next item is product recalls for $8,000. So we would only recall a product after it's been sold to a customer and then there's an issue and we have to recall it back, right? So that is an example of an external failure cost. The next cost is $4,500 of scrap. So scrap is when there's an internal failure cost, meaning there's an issue, we have to scrap that product and rework it. So put $4,500 to scrap. The next cost is quality inspectors for $48,000, and this is going to fall under appraisal costs. So we have quality inspectors to make sure that everything is functioning as it should, it's being produced in the manner or the specs that are required, right? That is all part of appraisal costs. So put that under appraisal costs. The next item is preventative maintenance for $19,500. Well, guess what? It's kind of there, right? It says it, it's preventive. So it's going to be $19,500 to prevention costs. The next item is supplier education for $17,500. This was going to fall under prevention costs, right? If we educate our suppliers on how to use the product and all that, that will help prevent costs of quality, right? So that is going to be $17,500 to prevention costs. The next item is materials inspection expense of $60,000, right? This is expensive in the grand scheme of it all. This is going to fall under appraisal costs, right? We need to inspect our materials and make sure they are completely up to spec and they meet all the specs that are required for producing this product, right? So put the $60,000 to appraisal costs. And then the last cost here is going to be processing product returns. That occurs when the customers have to return the product, right, because it's defective. That's going to be an example of an external failure cost, so put the $2,500 there. So now that we've mapped out all of the costs to one of the four buckets of cost of quality, well, we see prevention costs totals $57,000, appraisal costs totals $108,000, and then internal failure costs is $4,500, and lastly, external failure costs is $10,500, right? So this company spent a lot on prevention costs and appraisal costs. Now, ultimately, the question's only asking about total prevention costs for the current month, and that's going to be $57,000, so that's the correct answer. So overall, we learned about the cost of quality. This fits into the benchmarking process because what companies can do is compare themselves to other companies and say, okay, how much are our competitors spending on prevention or appraisal costs? And if we did have a failure, what would that look like for an internal failure cost or an external failure cost, right? So make sure you completely understand the four different buckets. When it comes to mapping expenses to one of the four buckets, again, it can be subjective. Try to be as objective as possible, especially if you see a question like this on the exam.